All right. Welcome everybody. This is the LBs, the Lover of Books author chats. We're here with Vaishnavi Patel for her awesome debut novel, Kaikeyi. We're just so excited to be here. There has been so much positive feedback on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm really excited to be here tonight. A little bit of housekeeping. If everybody can stay muted during the interview portion, just so that people can hear her give her answers. You are more than welcome to use the chat box during the beginning discussion. If a question pops up that you want to know, I'll try to keep track and she can turn it on as well. And if it works out, we'll just go ahead and address it right then. But if you want to ask your question live, you're more than welcome to save it for the end. There's an option at the bottom right of your screen where it says reactions, and you can click raise hand, and then that'll let me know that you want to ask her a question, and we'll get to that. We're also going to have the opportunity to take a photo op with her. So if you can have your book nearby or just a smile, everybody just turn your camera on and we'll take a photo at that point. And then hopefully you could share sometime tomorrow, this week, with social media to give this awesome debut author some more publicity. Now I'm going to go ahead and introduce Vaishnavi Patel. She is just graduated Harvard Law School. Big claps for that. That's no small feat. And she's studying for the bar as we speak, which I can tell you is not an easy task. She focused on constitutional law and civil rights. She likes to write at the intersection of Indian myth, feminism, and anti-colonialism. She grew up in and around Chicago, and in her spare time, I love this, she enjoys things that are almost stereotypical Midwestern, which are knitting, ice skating, drinking hot chocolate, and making hot dish. So welcome. We are so happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Is this like a small little break from studying, or
It's
are
great.
you
I needed this. Yeah.
a little brain break? Why don't you give us your little blurb for someone that hasn't read this book? What would you say this book is about?
Yeah. So Kaikeyi retells a small part of this big Indian epic called the Ramayana, which tells the story of this great prince, Ram, who is a god reincarnated on Earth, who goes on this journey to rescue his wife from an evil demon king, you know, ends a lot of evil, brings about justice in his world. And in that epic, Kaikeyi is his sort of evil stepmother type figure, although she's not quite his stepmother, and I would argue not quite evil, who exiles Ram and sends him off on this quest. So without Kaikeyi, there would be no Ramayana. There would be no journey, there would be no slaying of the evil demon king. She sort of kicks off everything that makes the Ramayana what it is. But she also gets a really bad rap, and kind of justifiably so, because she exiles her son because she wants her blood son to take the throne. And so Kaikeyi, the novel, reimagines Kaikeyi's life from her childhood through the point of exile, retelling the story from her perspective and sort of giving her the opportunity to tell her side of the story. So it asks the question, what if Kaikeyi exiled Ram for real reasons, or for reasons beyond just jealousy? What if there was more of a reason? And we sort of start at the beginning and see what that reason would be.
Okay, we have this awesome story. You're in law school. So how do we end up with the debut novel right now? Like, how did this even come about?
I mean, depending on who you ask, either poor or great life choices. But
Okay, tell us both.
yeah, so I mean, I started drafting. So the research process for Kaikeyi started, I would say, a good year before I started drafting, because I sort of started having this. I had always been interested in the character of Kaikeyi since I heard about her in stories growing up. But I would keep looking for stories from her perspective, but I never really had the urge to say, oh, I'm going to write it, until maybe like 2018, sometime there. And at that point I was like, you know what, like maybe I should write this story. But I knew that what I knew of the Ramayana was like what I had heard growing up. I'd read an abridged version that was like 300 pages, which the real Ramayana is like over 1,000 pages. So I knew I was missing a lot of the story. And I didn't really know what was being said, like in the scholarship world. So starting sort of in 2018, I was like working at a job in Chicago. I sort of set myself the task. I was like, first, I'm going to read the Ramayana. So I found a translation. I read the whole Ramayana, which took me like months. And I was like taking notes and all of that. And then I started finding academic articles, scholarly articles. That sort of sent me to realizing that there were all of these other versions and translations, some of which I had never heard of. So I tried to source those in English as much as I could and read portions of those that might be relevant to the story. So just this, long note-taking research process. And I sort of I got really immersed in the research. I kept like reading, researching. And then I got to law school and I was like, oh my God, like I haven't even started writing this book. It's sort of now or never. So my law school doesn't do grades first semester. So I decided, you know what? Like, what if I just write the book right now? So first semester of law school, I like go home every night and I just draft this novel. And then I sort of start querying, which is the process of finding an agent. I enter this contest called Pitch Wars to revise my book. And sort of by April, May of 2020, which was a crazy time for a lot of reasons, I got an agent and a book deal. And then here we are 2 years later, because that's how long it takes to publish a book. So I'm really glad that I did that. And it was a really nice thing to like start writing the book at the beginning of the law school and debut with it at the end of law school. It also made law school a potentially more stressful experience than it already was, to be like balancing law school deadlines and this. But I'm very glad I did it. Like if you ask my mom, she's like, I don't know why you did this. So that's the sort of differing opinion that we have over here. But I think it was worth it. And the pandemic was hard for everyone in a lot of ways. It was hard for me and my family in a lot of ways. But I'm not grateful, but I look on the bright side that I think it being a pandemic and not being able to have a social life gave me the time to revise and, publish this book instead. So I'm trying to like take that small blessing.
Absolutely. It's a blessing in disguise because, you hear both sides. Some people were able to write during this time period and use that time, and then other people, it just couldn't come. So, I mean, it's wonderful. And your mom got a dedication in the
Yes.
book, so she gets that. So your family, and you talk about your religion a little bit. How does that affect this novel? Like, why did you choose to do this?
Yeah, so I mean, my whole family is Hindu. I'm Hindu. I was raised Hindu, and the Ramayana is a religious epic. So it's not. I mean, it is an epic story, but it's an epic story of a religion. It tells the story of like a very major god in the religion, Ram, who's an incarnation of Vishnu, and it also has other gods like Hanuman in the tale. So it's not just a story. It's not just an epic, although it is those things. It's also a religious story, and I don't think for me personally, I don't think that means that the story can't be critiqued or modified or retold. In fact, we see across the region that it keeps getting retold and refitted for different purposes. For example, there's a Jain Ramayana, which is a different religion that portrays Jain values through the Ramayana, in which Ram doesn't actually kill Ravan because nonviolence is very important in that religion. There's an almost sort of Buddhist Ramayana, which has both Ram and Ravan as like very learned people in Buddhism. So it's been adapted and retold across a variety of stories. But I think approaching this, it was important to me to strike a balance between respecting my religion and respecting the stories that I grew up with, and also critiquing my religion and critiquing those things that I think are difficult or that we have to grapple with. I mean, I've had people say to me after I published this book, like, Hinduism isn't a patriarchal religion, or like this is anti-Brahmin because there's critique of certain like religious figures in the story. And so I say it's very odd for me to hear that Hinduism is not patriarchal, because I think that most major religions today are patriarchal. And it's not a critique. It's not like saying that one religion is worse than the other, to say that we have these problems and we should confront them. So I personally feel very grounded in feeling like this is my religion and I can talk about it and I can critique it and I can say something about it. Um, but I will say that there has continued to be this tension after Kaikeyi is published, where because it is part of a living religion, not everyone agrees. And I think, when it comes to religion, everyone is sort of entitled to their own opinion. So I'm not upset about it, but it is just something that has been a part of writing Kaikeyi.
Well, Megan actually mentions that in the chat box. What kind of criticism, like, is backlash? Has it been through reviews or just emails? Like, how does that come across? How does it even get to you?
Yeah, so I don't read reviews, so I'm not really sure what's being said, but I'm positive that if people are finding me on social media or through my website, they have written reviews. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But I will say that, like, I get emails through my website form that are like, "This is so disrespectful. How could you do this?" But weirdly, people who take the time to give me a comment through my website are at least like polite about it. And then on social media, I'm a very liberal blocker. Like, you say something to me that I feel is even a little off, and I will block you. But I do get, or I used to get, before I like blocked a lot of people, like DMs or comments on my posts that were like, like, how could you do X? Like, you should be Y, where X is something in the book and Y is some sort of threat. So that is less pleasant, but um, I don't know.
Well,
I feel like most authors who write about topics that are in any way controversial get that, because social media like puts this barrier that makes people feel okay with saying those things. So it's sort of a risk of the trade.
I do like that you didn't see the religion as a stagnant, like it was something that could grow and be re-envisioned and adapted to today's society. And I wanted to know, with this novel, do you believe that a reader should have that background knowledge of the Indian mythology to get the full beauty of it? Or do you think a reader that has no knowledge at all, that can step in and get what you want them to get out of it?
Yeah, I think I tried my best to write the story for that it could be accessible for people who have no knowledge of the Ramayana, to explain sort of the religious background and who the figures are and why they might have tension with each other. So from that perspective, I think the themes and the messages of the story are very understandable. But I do think that I was writing also for people like me who grew up with the story, and I do think that the messages or the themes are probably hit a lot harder if you grew up immersed in this world and then are seeing this other version. And I did include some like little Easter eggs of like name dropping characters or tribes or whatever it is from the Ramayana, like the monkey people, just like putting a one off of them. So for people who are familiar with the story, they know what I'm talking about. But I think I did try my best, and I also put some information in the author's note so that the story would be accessible and would be, completely understandable from start to finish if you don't have any experience with the Ramayana.
Well, I was someone that did not have the knowledge going in, and I thought it was very universal. I was able to pick up what you were putting down. I could see where the tension was growing, and I felt all those emotions along the way. Nidhi wanted to know if you ever thought of including other women from the mythology, and I'm not sure I'm going to get their names right, but Mahabharati,
The
Habrata?
Mahabharata?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. And Drapati, is that
Yeah,
right?
so that's a great question. Thanks, Nidhi. I don't know if she's on or not, but um, yeah, so I mean, I am hoping to write, by hoping to write, I mean, I can't say more than that, but look, in 2023, there will be another book.
Woohoo.
I am hoping that it will be a retelling based on a very small part of the Mahabharata. So for those who don't know, the Mahabharata is sort of the other major Indian epic. And if, the Ramayana is big, the Mahabharata is massive. And it tells the story of way more people, way more families going really far back. And so it's just like a very complex tale. And there are a lot of women in it, and they also often get sort of not like pushed to the side because they are major characters that influence the plot, but they don't get the same development or depth of treatment that a lot of the men get. But I'm retelling a very small part of the Mahabharata, which is sort of necessary to tackle an epic of this size. So Draupadi who is sort of one of the main women in the story, will make a minor appearance, probably, unless my editor cuts it. But she will not be a major focus. I'll be focusing on a different person who is pretty prominent in the story. And I can't really say more than that. But yeah, look, that will be forthcoming.
Well, we appreciate that little tidbit. Was Kaikeyi, was she a hard character? Because like you said, there's not a lot written about them and these females, and it's very patriarchal starting off. So how do you get the depth? Because you're wanting to create a very strong female and flip it. It's almost like Wicked, that flip, or so how did you go about doing that? What was your process?
Yeah, so growing up, and I think I see a question in the chat from Shruti that is sort of related. But growing up, when I heard Kaikeyi's story, my grandma told us this story, and she was like, Kaikeyi is very evil, and Kaikeyi is, you know, misguided and jealous. And then my mom jumped in and she was like, actually, Kaikeyi was like a great warrior. And how do we know that she didn't exile Ram for other reasons? Like she was necessary for the whole Ramayana. So growing up, I sort of heard this tension between Kaikeyi is very evil and Kaikeyi is complicated or misunderstood. And so I sort of had this framework, this duality going into researching the story. And then from there, reading the story really closely, especially for Kaikeyi, other small details started emerging. For example, and I think most prominently, I learned that Kaikeyi was promised as her bride price that her blood son would take the throne. And I think that sort of flips her demand that her son take the throne at the end on its head, because that's the promise that she was sort of given to marry. And so I think that once I had this framework, I was able to pick out little details of her story and sort of add them up into what was sort of a sketch of her character. And then from there, I just sort of built what I thought was interesting. I mean, not for Kaikeyi, but for a lot of the other female characters, I like picked traits from like my friends, and I was like, okay, I'm giving Kaushalya this from this friend and that from that friend, and sort of like, because I think that female friendship is so important to the story, and it's so important in my life, that bringing that dynamic to life by like sort of drawing on what I know in the real world was really helpful, because even if it's not on the page, you know that these women had rich inner lives. You know that they had a lot of depth to them, that they had a lot of emotions, that even though it doesn't get told in the verses of the Ramayana, that this was happening. And so sort of working from a place of assuming that they had all of this going on, it was sort of not that hard to make up what wasn't there.
Was the part about the binding plane, was that already part of the storyline, or is that something that you created for the story?
That was something that I made up. So I kind of wanted, so part of my, to back up a little bit, Kaikeyi I describe as sort of like an alternate history of the Ramayana. Like I do not claim, or I do not want it to be thought of as the actual Ramayana, because it makes a lot of changes, and it makes a lot of changes to the major characters. And so to me, this is sort of like a, what if some changes were made, and that's how we get this. And so one of the things that I wanted to put in to like very fully differentiate the two, and to make Kaikeyi a little more fantastical, because the Ramayana as a religious story is not really fantasy. I would describe it more as historical fiction, is to add an actual fantasy element, which is that Kaikeyi has magic. And because this story is so focused on relationships and sort of free will versus fate and manipulation and the ties that bind us together, I wanted to give her some sort of power that kind of illustrated that, and for it to be subtle enough that it's not affecting the entire plot of the story. I kind of want to leave the question, like, could Kaikeyi have just done this on her own? Like, is this a hallucination? But like, is this just a representation of what she's really doing in her life? Um, and also to then provide attention where, you know, from Kaikeyi's eyes, she's 100% right through the whole story. Like at no point is she like, actually, what I'm doing is like immoral. But because she has the binding plane, and then we watch her problems with Ram, we sort of, I hope, get to see that she is a little hypocritical because she's been using this magic her whole life, and she thinks this is fine, you know, there's no problems here. And then when Ram starts to influence people, she's like, this is so terrible. How could he do this to them? And it's sort of my purpose also in adding the binding plane in was to then be able to give readers pause for a second and maybe have them think like, is Kaikeyi 100% good, or does she just think she's 100% good? So it sort of came to serve a lot of purposes beyond just adding that fantastical element.
Well, and that was one of my questions was, do you believe that Kaikeyi is altruistic, or do you think it's somewhat intrinsic that she wants this power, and that she believes that she knows best to do the right thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kaikeyi is a really fun character to write because she definitely wants to improve things, but it's hard to tell if she wants to improve things because she knows that that will increase her own power, or if she wants to improve things just because she wants to improve things. And I think it's kind of ambiguous. I think she herself probably doesn't know or couldn't say. And what's really interesting about her is there is one way in which she really doesn't have power, and that's because of, you know, patriarchy and gender. And so she's really fighting hard for that. But there's a huge way in which she has a ton of power, which is that she's a wealthy queen of a major, powerful kingdom. And her life is just always going to be so much better than a woman who is just a commoner and like a farmer, for example, or any other sort of job. And not even, I mean, caste is not like explicit in this book, but she is very caste privileged as well. And so she never questions that. She's never like, maybe we should have a democracy, like maybe we shouldn't have, you know, extreme wealth. Like she's fine with that because that gives her power and a voice. And so I think she's a really complicated character in that way, because as much as she is doing good things and fighting for good things, and she does want to help people, she like doesn't like to watch other people suffer, her motivations are never 100% altruistic. Like she does want to leave her mark on the world. Like she there is that ego there, and she does want to have more power and voice. But I don't necessarily think that doing good things for those reasons makes her a bad person or a bad character. I mean, like the impact that she has to improve other people's lives is much bigger than most other characters here. So I think that gives her sort of that complexity that makes her interesting. At least I personally think so, because I spent you know, years in her head writing for perspective.
Well, I definitely picked up on the duality of it, because it was a little bit, you know, I'm thinking, is she really making the right decisions? But I never felt like it was ill-intended, that she always had other women at heart, not just, and I think if you went overboard and made her want to start a democracy, it would be a little unbelievable. Yeah. Like I think it was a nice fine line. But what she did do was, even though she had the binding plane, she still wanted to push herself physically, mentally, and into this from princess to warrior transformation. And I thought she did that beautifully. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I don't know if anybody here liked Game of Thrones, but like I could see Arya with the sword, or I could see Mulan, you know, I mean, all these great warrior characters. It was beautiful.
Oh, I'm so glad. I mean, I think something that was a real joy to write in this story, and one of my favorite elements, was the sibling relationships. And you know, I have a younger sister and I have a younger brother, and so just like writing that and how they push each other. And I think Kaikeyi's desire to become a warrior and to excel in all of those things comes from her twin brother and wanting to compete with him and be his equal and share in all the things that he does. And as somebody who is extremely competitive, and even though my siblings are much younger than me, was constantly competing with them for no reason, that was just sort of like a very like personal touch in there. And so it sort of became a natural extension of that sort of vibe and relationship. Because I think that, you know, that is who Kaikeyi is. Like she is a very competitive person who wants to excel and be the best and not be held back by any social construct. And so that is why she wants to become a warrior and to prove herself that way. And I think in sort of part of talking about her complexity and her duality, she, she's super into being a warrior. She's like super, I want to go to war. I want to see what it's like. But then she sees it and she realizes like, actually, this is terrible. This is not fun and competitive and glorious. This is just suffering. And that sort of, changes her perspective. And from that point on, she's not really as hungry for war or conflict of that nature anymore. And I think that's sort of weighing on the maybe good side or ability to learn side. So she sort of, in all things, has this duality, as I think all people do.
Does I liked how you brought in the visions, or it's almost like you would be transported at the river several times to these visions. Is that part of the mythology, or is that something that you brought in?
Yeah, so it's kind of both. I mean, the idea that gods can speak to you or tell you things to come is present in most stories, in most ancient religious stories. I mean, there's like versions of that in Hinduism where gods sort of tell you what is going to be your fate, but you don't quite know it. So you're acting off of half information. I actually think that's a common theme in a lot of, like, you see that in Greek mythology, you see that in Egyptian mythology. So that's part of it. And then part of it was that specifically like who the goddesses were, because Nidra, who's the goddess of sleep and dreams, is assisting her, that sort of, I want to give it that dreamlike quality. So it's kind of drawing on a couple of different elements there.
Well, June was a perfect month for me to read this one with Pride. That you decided to make her asexual. Was that what was your reasoning behind that? And just tell us a little bit about that decision.
Yeah, so there's multiple reasons. So first, like I personally wanted to see more of that rep. I feel like, I've seen ace main characters sometimes, but it's very rare and it's something that I would have liked to see more of growing up. So that's one element of it. I think another element for me is that it helped drive home some of the things I wanted to highlight in the story in the Ramayana. In like I remember watching this like TV serial of the Ramayana when I was a kid, and Kaikeyi is always this like, she's not old. She's like a younger woman. She's like portrayed as like very beautiful and like ornate and well dressed, and she sort of gives off the like seductress vibe that I think a lot of evil women in myth fall into. Like they're said of either the seductress or the crone, and she falls into the seductress 100%. And when she goes to demand her boons, she like takes off all of her clothes until she's in her undergarments and lies on the floor of her palace. And so I wanted to sort of remove the whole using her womanly wiles trope from the story, because while it can be interesting to watch women claim their sexuality and to use it to their advantage, I thought it would be a much more interesting story if, in this particular instance, because of the way her motivations are structured, if she was not even considering that element. And so having her focus in all of her relationships, including with her husband, be very loving and very trusting and very respectful, and to just not have the romantic or sexual element was really important to me, and I thought made a lot of sense because Kaikeyi loves just as much as anybody else in the book, if not more. She has a huge heart. She experiences so many different kinds of love for her friends and her family and her children. And so just because she doesn't experience romantic love doesn't mean that she's not equally driven by these emotions as anybody else. And so I think for her in particular, it made sense to be able to highlight that.
Yeah, it was. I thought it was a great representation because I don't know that I have read that, and um, it did sort of flip it a little bit because you see her emotion at the end when when her husband's passing, how desperate she is for that connection still. Um, the other thing about the month of June was, of course, our Supreme Court came down with the decision, and so this was really I mean, I wanted to hear Kaikeyi roar because it's such a feminist novel. It has so much power, like you said, that friendship, and just that she wants to take care of her people and other women that are not in the same situation as her. It sort of came together in a fireball for me. So it was I thought that was great. I don't know if you want to talk about, I know you said you want to write about feminism, so I
Yeah,
was
I
going to give
mean,
you that platform.
I think in many ways, Kaikeyi has been, and probably everything I write in the future has been influenced by my work, which is that I came to law school to be a reproductive rights lawyer. That is no longer the plan. I'm doing voting rights primarily because of what just happened. The writing was on the wall, but I have done a lot of work on abortion stuff. I worked on a, amicus curiae brief for Dobbs. So I was very in the abortion fight. And in many ways, that's a fight about the place of religion in determining rights in a polity. And I think that that just sort of bleeds into a lot of things that I write, but Kaikeyi is also about what is the role of religion in determining people's rights in a polity. And so even though it's not about abortion, it is about that concept and who gets to make the rules and why do they get to make the rules and why do they get to make rules about things that don't actually affect their own personal rights. So yeah, it's been odd to have Kaikeyi come out at this time in which all of this was happening, because at the time that I was writing it, it seemed that that was relatively safe. And then obviously a lot changed in 2020. But I think that it just naturally has influenced my writing and probably, I mean, it's definitely influenced my draft of book 2 a lot, and I'm sure it will continue to. So I'm glad that I've heard from a lot of people actually that Kaikeyi was like a really good read for the loss of the right. So I'm glad that it resonates, even though I'm disappointed that it's still a relevant topic all these thousands
Yeah.
of millennia later.
Well, so much of the insinuations are that women are what bring the weakness into the world, or that they're the negative influence. And that's what you're flipping here. And so, can you talk a little bit about that, about why that was so important? Because everything that they would say, they would blame her for any horrible thing that was happening. It was a woman's fault, it seemed to be. So,
Yeah.
is that part of the Hindu patriarchal, or is that just something you wanted
I
to
think
highlight?
that's just a feature of patriarchy generally. I don't think it's specific to Hinduism. And the reason I say that is because it's in my bio, but I grew up in the Midwest and I grew up as a, minority in many ways, but especially in religion. And I saw a lot of, I lived in a very evangelical area and I saw what that was like. And I measured my tank top straps and my shorts length with my fingertips and all of that to go to school. And that was like humiliating and fun. And, I watched a lot of these things happen. I saw some crazy billboards. I think that it's a feature of it's a feature of patriarchy and religious patriarchy, no matter what the religion or the country is. It's actually very funny to me because I've gotten this question, not this question, but I've gotten a similar question in other interviews, which is like, are you nervous that Hindu people are going to react poorly because they're more patriarchal? And I think that's, really crazy because the most patriarchy I've ever experienced is living here in Christian patriarchy. So I think that, all religions have this problem. Usually when religions are controlled by or founded by and propagated by men to an extent where women are not allowed to have a voice, it's a problem. It continues to be a problem everywhere. There's very progressive Hindus out there. There's very progressive Hindu groups out there that are practicing an anti-patriarchal feminist religion. And I think that's wonderful. Just as there are, anti-patriarchal Christian groups out there that practice a very progressive and free version of that religion. So I don't think it's particular to Hinduism or to Christianity or to any other major religion. I think that's what happens when you have these religions that are millennia old and change is slow. Um, I think one thing in particular that's in this book that was really influenced by my modern experiences and not really by any particular Hindu mythology or underpinning. And this was actually at the time of writing the book, what I thought was going to be most relevant was actually how young men are radicalized in patriarchy. Because a lot of what you were mentioning just now, like women are weaker or they bring weakness into society, or, integrating women into broader economic activity is like bad. That's it's not a belief that is so widespread that you would expect it to keep cropping up again and again. And I think we've discovered in the past 10 to 15 years or so, especially with the rise of the internet, that young men are often radicalized by peers or by people they view as mentors outside of the home, even if they have positive feminist influences within the home. And so when I wrote this book, I was thinking a lot about that and a lot about my younger brother who would come home with questions like this, or don't feminists hate men? And I was like, where did you encounter this? Like, you have two older sisters and, all of these badass women in your life who are like out there having careers, like, where are you encountering this? And the answer was Reddit or his other friends. And so I sort of illustrated that in this book, in terms of how these beliefs get taken up and recycled over and over again, because a lot of these influences come from places you don't expect.
Well, yeah, I think that was well put. I mean, that it did need to be addressed because, it's so frustrating that every other line is, well, the gods will look down upon it.
Right.
Society is going to be, hurt because of women working in the market or whatever, the next example is. What I also wanted to discuss is the theme of that she always struggles with of, should she be interfering or should there be inaction? Because there's this push and pull for her constantly of, should she be making the decision or should she hold back? And why, what was your reasoning behind all that?
I think that is just like a fun and ancient theme about, destiny or predestiny versus action, and how much can your action actually change things, or do you end up playing into whatever you were predestined to do? I think that that's
Mhm.
a just it was just for me personally like a fun, interesting theme to explore, because I always wondered that reading the myths, like how much of this is happening because it was foretold that such and such thing would happen, and how much of it is caused by our own actions or inaction. There's not really like a great struggle that of mine between inaction and action that I can like point to. I just think it's a fun theme to explore with these epics in particular, because there's so much about it that's like the weight of destiny and fate. And, Ram was meant to be reincarnated because he had to deal with this great threat. And so does that mean he just is going to deal with it no matter what? Does that mean he's going, like, what is going to cause this fate to happen? And so to sort of explore that more, I just thought it would be fun.
Well, and it plays right into her self punishment and blame that she constantly feels as a mother, as a woman, as a leader, and it really pushes the emotion through the storyline as well. So, okay, I want to talk about your theme of your ability to change paths, because so much, from the beginning of the story to the end, there is an arc for what we see for the women of the land, not just where she is, but it's expanded beyond. And so, what? Why are you? I guess I want to put it like, is that your biggest theme? Is that where you were wanting to go with this novel? Is that women helping women?
Yeah, I think that was um sort of the like most important through line to me. I don't know if that's the biggest theme, because I think like fate versus free will and manipulation, all of that was very important to me to portray. But sort of the through line, like the heart of Kaikeyi's story, I kind of wanted to be about women helping women, both in small ways, or I'm going to put that in quotes, small ways, because I don't necessarily think that the relationships between women and them just helping each other individually is in any way small, but sort of on an individual scale and on a social scale. Because I think I really, as I sort of started developing the story, I wanted it to be about more than just Kaikeyi, but a little bit about collective action and the power in collective action. And so you sort of start with Kaikeyi very alone and isolated, and building relationships with Manthara and the rest of the women that she meets. And then ultimately the end of her arc and the hopefulness being not necessarily that she changed her individual path, but understanding that she might have changed a like collective path, and that that has just as much power. And I think it goes back to what I was talking about earlier about, she's a complex character because there is this whole individual versus collective pull for her. She wants individual credit and glory and recognition, but she also does want to have this collective help. And in the end, she sort of does not have the individual power or the individual recognition. She's going to go down in history as the bad guy, but she has found value and worth in being some part of this bigger collective. And so that gives her a sense of peace by the end.
You also made some changes for Sita's father. Pronounce his name for me.
Ravan, yeah.
Ravan. Okay. Why did you make those changes? And did you want him to be seen as a positive or manipulative? Where did you want him to fall?
Yeah, so this is a great character, and I think a great question. I think I saw a similar one in the chat as well. So Ravan went on probably the biggest journey of any of the characters that I wrote about in Kaikeyi. In the very first draft, so to back up, for those who are not familiar with the Ramayana, in the Valmiki Ramayana, which is sort of the original, Ravan is not Sita's father. He he definitely covets Sita as a wife or a sexual conquest, and he ultimately kidnaps her for a variety of reasons, with the intent of raping her and making her his wife. He is a rapist. Sita is not the only woman who has done this to, and he is just sort of motivated by lust and greed. So in the very first draft of Kaikeyi, Ravan wasn't really there. He was sort of this like big threat looming on the horizon that was sort of unchanged from the Ramayana, where he was this, or the Valmiki Ramayana, I should say, where he was this just like big evil demonic threat. And as I was writing the story, it just didn't sit right with me, because every other character got the chance to be complicated and to have more layers built in than they do in the original epic. I mean, Ram has layers built in that are not present in the original. Kaikeyi has all of these new shades added to her. And it just felt odd to me to write Ravan as, yeah, he's just an evil guy on the edge of the world. And there's also some, scholarship and discussion about the portrayal of Ravan coincided with the portrayal of tribal people in India who are, really discriminated against and looked down upon. And so after all of this, and after sort of writing the first draft, I was like, actually, I think I want to revisit Ravan. Because over the course of my research, I had discovered that Ravan has a lot of variation across the stories. So in the Valmiki Ramayana, he's what I just said he is. But in other versions of the Ramayana, sometimes he's Sita's father, and he's trying to get rid of Sita because he's heard that Sita will bring about his downfall. In other versions, he's this, especially in non-Hindu versions, like in Buddhist or Jain versions, he's actually kind of this like tragic anti-hero, and you're supposed to feel sad when he's defeated, and he's considered this like great learned teacher. And in some versions, Ram doesn't even kill Ravan, or Ravan is not like the main threat of the story. And so I decided to draw on those versions and sort of abandon Valmiki's Ramayana Ravan, because I wanted to complicate Ravan, and I personally don't think it's possible to complicate a rapist. I couldn't do it. I don't feel right about it. So having that version of him be in the story where he is trying to rape Sita and he is trying to rape other women, I just couldn't add shades of gray to that. So I decided to basically work off of a different version of the Ramayana for his character and then add him into the story. So he in the Ramayana, him and Kaikeyi probably never meet. I mean, there's a ton we don't know about Ravana and Kaikeyi's early life. So like I guess conceivably they could meet, but that would be very odd. And they really do not meet in the Ramayana. But in order to sort of develop his character and to tell some part of his story, I decided to add in a couple of sections where he meets Kaikeyi. And I think ultimately I want people to feel very uneasy about him or to feel like Kaikeyi is blinded to his faults because he's her friend. And so that was sort of like the goal here. I don't know if I pulled this off. I have some people who read the book and tell me like, oh my God, Ravan gave me such bad vibes. And I have some people who are like, why is Ravan such a good guy? So I think maybe this was a place where I was ambiguous when I was writing. But in my head, I think that he is a conqueror, that he is very greedy for more territory and to conquer more people, that he is willing to unleash demons on the world to get what he wants and to sort of manipulate people into giving him what he wants. And I think Kaikeyi will never believe that because he's her friend and he helped her personally. And once again, she's a little blinded and complicated and is unable to see past her biases to realize that Ram is telling the truth about him. So I think that was sort of where I was trying to go with Ravan. I leave it up to the readers to decide if I succeeded because I have truly heard so many things across the board that at this point I don't know what to think. I'm not, I don't think I'm a perfect writer, and this is my debut novel, so it's very possible that it didn't come across, but that's sort of where I was coming from when I was writing about the character.
Well, I think it probably depends on how much knowledge you have of that coming into it, because for me, it was, a little unconcerning how much she trusted him so quickly. And so I thought, well, is there something there? But then for me personally, it felt like it was a true friendship and he almost seemed more reasonable than Rama ever did because of his well intentions, because it's a daughter situation. So I think that was a good flip of that. But I think, we are running out of time quickly. So I want to go ahead and get the picture done so we don't forget that.
Right.
So if everybody can get their cameras turned on, that would be great. And I think we may have to do it twice because we have more people on screen. All right, so if we have our book. If you don't, just smile. I think that's all right. Mike, are you ready?
A countdown. So 3, 2, 1, cheese. All right, let me save that one.
Thanks, everybody. I like the background, by the way. Is it Zai? It's perfect.
Okay.
We're gonna do another one, or is it good? Okay.
3, 2, 1, cheese. All right, those look good.
Awesome, thanks, guys. All right, so now if you do want to ask a question, go ahead and raise your hand. And I'm going to try to spotlight you if you have a question. Otherwise, I can ask from the chat box. Thanks for joining, Vivian. All right, do you see any hands? All right, yes. Swara, let's start with you. I'm going to add spotlight. All right.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Hi. So just like you, I also grew up like hearing stories of the Ramayana. And what really fascinated me was the story of Ahalya that you added in the story. Because when I learned it, I kind of learned it as her story was the example set forward as to like why a woman's reputation should never be harmed by sexual assault or anything that happens to her. And like in Hinduism, I know that she's considered as one of the 5 like most pure women because she is so much loyalty and integrity and all that stuff. And so I was really interested when I read like a different interpretation of that story in your book, and I was just kind of wondering like where that came from.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the question. I also heard that growing up that I Ahalya is very, pure, and even though she's tricked and she's cursed, like she is steadfast, and that is why Ram ultimately frees her. And to be honest, that bothered me personally because I was like, why was she turned to stone in the first place? Like, why is it okay that she was turned to stone? Like, why does she need Ram to turn her back to prove that she is virtuous and good and like deserving? Why does all of this happen to her in the first place? And I think those questions really motivated my interpretation of Ahalya, especially because when we hear the story of Ahalya, we hear it from like a modern perspective. I hesitate to use that word, but from a perspective where the Ramayana has already happened and she's already been freed, and she's already been freed by Lord Ram and had her feet washed by him and all of that. But contemporaneously in the story, while she is still stoned, she is still a woman cursed to stone because she had sex with a man who was not her husband. And so I think that really motivated my interpretation of her story and of how I included it and integrated it. And then obviously it was entirely my invention to have her tutor be Ram's husband. I just needed that like circle to be closed for the story. And so that was motivated by like plot and story purposes entirely to have that added in. Because then I think it makes Ram's ultimate freeing of her a reflection not of Ahalya's purity, but of Ram's growth, and the fact that, to me, at the end of the story, Ram is the hero that he was meant to be. He is virtuous, and he is shown one of the hardest skills to show, which is that he is able to learn and change and grow, and that is why he frees Ahalya and he listens to her story, even though he had the other side being whispered in his ear for all those years. And so I sort of wanted to flip it from a morality tale about Ahalya into a tale about Ram and a reflection of who he is. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Thanks,
it did.
Laura.
Thank you.
All right.
I see a question in
Daphne?
the chat. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's a question about the poly relationship, and I think somebody else asked it up above. So yeah, in the story, there are sister wives, basically, that all three of these women are with Dashrath. And, there's this, like, we all know the trope of all the women fighting over the man. And I just think that's very reductive and also very unlikely. Like, these three women were very powerful women in this court, and they had so much more to gain by learning to love each other, or at least be friendly with each other, than by being each other's enemies. So I found it almost disingenuous to write an antagonistic relationship between them. And so from the start, I set out to write them as friends, and it sort of just naturally turned into this, like very loving relationship, and this relationship where they consider each other to be sisters and to be each other's close friends and confidants, and to 100% all be each other's family. And I'm so glad that it's resonated with a lot of people, because I think people are tired of seeing the women fighting over a man trope. And I think showing that they love each other is this novel. I sometimes describe it as a love story. I mean, it's not like a romantic love story, but it is 100% just about the love that you have for your family and the different forms that family can take. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question really, but those are my thoughts.
We're gonna, yeah, it was great. Daphne has a question. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us and to discuss the book. I really enjoyed it. I came into this not really, not having much of a background and not knowing the story, behind this. So I thought this was a good retelling. One of the things that struck out to me was Kaikeyi. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing the name.
Okay.
But so her husband made a promise to her, or to her and to her father, that her son would be the heir. Now, I feel like so much would have been different had she or her husband shared that promise with the court, or at least with her sister wives.
Mm-hmm.
So was that intentional, that they never mentioned that to anyone else?
Yeah, so that's kind of like a weird canonical quirk that I decided to keep, which is that this is a promise. This is a promise that's in the original Ramayana, and nobody seems to know about it. Even Kaikeyi and Dashrath seem to forget at points. And so I just sort of brought that dynamic into this story. I think it makes sense, or the way at least I told myself it makes sense, is that they both sort of assume that the other person has taken care of telling people until it's been so many years that at that point it would be odd to break in and be like, actually, by the way. So I think that's sort of what causes that tension. But it's just sort of a quirk of the original story where this is Kaikeyi's bride price, essentially, and then everyone forgets about it to the point that where she claims her boons, everyone's like, how could she do this? She's just jealous. Where a very valid alternate interpretation would be that she's just claiming what was promised to her.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you. We're going to go to Zai. Let's see if I can get her on screen. Yeah, go ahead and ask your question.
She's already kind of touched on it. It was about the sister wives. I was just kind of curious what biases were set aside to be able to write this sister wife relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily know like about biases. I think that it was just my natural like inclination to write them as
loving
friends and having a very close and loving and trusting relationship. I think if anything, it was like I kind of found out afterwards that people were expecting them to be enemies, because some of my like early readers were like, wow, I really like how you flipped that trope. And I was like, oh, I didn't mean to. It just happened. So
I thought it was very lovely, and I just really thought it was refreshing. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go now to LA. Let's see if I can get her on screen. Do you want to ask your question? See, add spotlight. Go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I thank you for doing this event. I love the story. So I did forward this through Instagram, so I'll just ask the question. So
Yes.
we're getting a lot of mythology retellings, and we're also getting a lot of Middle Eastern, Southeast Asian stories as well. Have you read any from either or, and what would you recommend, even if they haven't come out yet, because you probably got to read some before we all did?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there have been a lot of retellings recently, and I'm really hopeful that we're going to get a lot more specifically non-Western retellings. I think we get a lot from Greece for sure, a lot from like Norse mythology or like various British stories. So I'm really hoping that we get more from these regions. I think I don't know of any like very specific retellings that are coming out soon, but a couple of South Asian books that I'm really looking forward to. The First Binding by R.R. Verdi, which is a epic fantasy, South Asian inspired. So I've only read half of it, but it's amazing. It's epic in scope. I think it's like the first of a trilogy, I want to say.
First of three.
Yeah. So it's like very epic in scope. And I'm super excited about it. And I'm super excited to see that. I think also a book that came out last year, I think The Jasmine Throne, also is a South Asian inspired epic fantasy. It's also a trilogy, and that's also a wonderful book integrating a lot of different South Asian cultures because it's such a diverse region. So I think that's one thing. So another book that I really like that is coming out in September is called Monsters Born and Made by Tanvi Barwa. And that is, I think it leans YA, and it's being billed as a Hunger Games retelling, but it's very much South Asian and South Asian inspired. And it's really a story about caste and about the like problems and discrimination of the caste system, as well as people fighting against it and the perils of that. And there's like so many complicated critiques of that element. And so if you like the sort of it's a story about a lot of things and fantasy and all of those elements, but it's also a sort of heavy critique with like with a specific angle. I think that's a great book. I think Kaikeyi sort of falls into that realm because of the way it approaches feminism and patriarchy. So this is a similar kind of vibe, but for cast. So I highly recommend Monsters Born and Made.
Born and Made.
Well, thank you.
Oh, thank you very
Um,
much. Trying to get this down.
There's a couple questions here I just want to get to them really quick. Lauren wanted to know if you knew you wanted to be a writer when you were growing up. Has this been like a long-term interest or just something that happened around law school?
So when I was like young, like, you know, like third, fourth grade, I was like, I'm going to be a famous author one day. I think a lot of kids are like that. Like a lot of my friends also had that dream, but then I sort of abandoned it. I was like, I'm going to become an economist. I went to school, I studied economics. I was like, I am not going to become an economist. And then I like, you know, worked in the education world for a couple of years and I came to law school. So it's been sort of like a winding path. I gave up on that dream a long time ago and then rekindled it when I came to law school to be a writer. And now I'm sort of hoping to be able to do both for as long as they'll let me. So
Well,
yeah.
we're excited. Yeah, the second one's in the works. Mads, get booky with it, wants to know what being picked up by Book of the Month was like expanding that readership. How did you get chosen and what has it done for your novel?
Yeah, I think I don't know how I got chosen with Book of the Month, at least for me and for people I know who have also gotten picked 2 months beforehand. You just get an email in your inbox that's like, welcome, you've been chosen for Book of the Month. And you're like, oh my God, I didn't even know I was being considered. So that was sort of my experience. I've been a subscriber for a Book of the Month for like 4 or 5 years. So it was like very exciting and shocking to me to be chosen. I think it's been both really great in some ways, and there have been some downsides. I can talk about both. So it's been really amazing to get the increased readership and to get the book in the hands of people who might not have otherwise heard of it or picked it up. And so many Book of the Month people are so generous and or like read, post reviews. It gets the book, you get like social media posts and things out of it. And so it's just like very helpful as an author, and it is a huge expansion of the audience. I'd say a downside of it, and it's not Book of the Month's fault, but when I got chosen and when it was announced, I got a message from another author of color who had been a Book of the Month selection a few months prior. And she was like, just so you know, like, this is amazing and I'm so happy for you. And also the readership skews extremely white, and you are going to get like racist reviews from being chosen for this. And this was at a time before the book came out, so I was still reading some reviews, and it absolutely bore out where I would get reviews that were like, I couldn't follow this book because I couldn't pronounce any of the names and things like that. And I don't know if that would have happened. I'm sure it would have happened anyways, but I think it gets amplified a little bit when you get picked for a book club that has such a huge reach. And so I think there's like sort of a network of BIPOC authors that I think, we warn each other, we tell each other about these things, but that was a unexpected side effect that I sort of had to like learn how to manage. But it was good in a way because I learned to stop reading reviews, and therefore I really was out of there before things got ugly. So that was good.
Yeah, I'm sorry that you would even have to experience that. I'm hoping that the more positive ways out, and because it gets in the hands of more
Absolutely.
people that wouldn't experience it, and because it was transforming. It was absolutely phenomenal novel.
And it
Go ahead.
was overall definitely way more of a positive experience than a negative experience. I also want to be like honest about the downsides when it happens. But I definitely think that by far it was a positive experience, and it's so cool. I'm still getting tagged in posts, like people, because in Book of the Month you can like pick add-ons that are from past months. So I'm still getting tagged in people picking it for their boxes, which is like really cool and makes me feel like, oh, people are still reading my book, which is like something that I think all authors worry about after like debut month. They're like, does anybody know my book exists anymore? So that's been like a really, like, it brings a smile to my face kind of thing.
That's awesome. Akila wanted to know if you found a good community and the people of color that, because you're a debut author, have you been able to find that network, that group to help you along the way?
Yeah, so I think I feel very, very lucky in having a really strong community. I was in Pitch Wars, which is I think it doesn't happen anymore, but it was a mentorship program for aspiring authors who did not have an agent yet to sort of join, find a community, get help with revisions, then go out and look for an agent. And so from that group, I'm still in touch with about like 20 to 30 of my peers from there. Like we have a big sort of Slack that we are all in. And so there's a lot of BIPOC authors there, and we all chat and talk and, swap tales. And so that's just been a wonderful support. And then, I've been living in New Haven, and there are some other, science fiction and fantasy authors of color who live in New Haven. For anybody who follows me on social media, I think that I post about it sometimes, but that like having that in-person community of a couple of authors who live here and being able to get together with them for like dinner or to just hang out with them has been really helpful. I think there's just something to be said for somebody in person, like shaking you and being like, do not read your reviews, which is what Rebecca Kwong, who's the author of The Poppy Wart, does for me, and continues to do so on a daily basis sometimes. So I think people in this community are so generous with their time and their experience and sharing like tips, tricks, advice. So I felt very, very blessed in that regard.
Well, I wanted to just congratulate you on a phenomenal debut novel. It was such a blessing that we got to read this. I wanted to quote the Washington Post, did a write-up on it, which is huge too. It says that Kaikeyi Patel resets the balance of power, creating an unforgettable heroine who understands that it isn't necessarily kings or gods who change history, but a disgraced woman who can look upon a group of girls and see, quote, a child freer than her mother had been. And I loved that. I loved your themes, and we've had such great discussions on Instagram and Facebook about this book, and it's opened a lot of dialogue. So great job. And we all cannot wait until, we can see what you come out with next. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, readers out there, for sticking with it and for reading her book as well. If you please follow her, she does a great job putting material out there on social media. And hopefully you can follow me, The Lover of Books, coming up in 2 weeks. I have right here The Unlikely Animals by Annie Hartnett. And then you may have also heard of More Than You'll Ever Know from Katie Gutierrez. So that was a GMA pick coming up this month as well. So lots coming up. There will be a recording of this on the YouTube channel if you didn't catch all of it. And I hope you can join us again sometime. But good night, everybody. Thank you, Mike, helping in the background.
Thank you all so much.
Wonderful...
It was a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Mike, for your tech help as well.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.